listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I provide non-judgmental coaching to people who are dealing with difficult relationship situations, such as infidelity. On this show, we feature tools and guidance from my coaching practice, as well as advice from other professionals who help people deal with challenging relationship situations. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with John Corcoran of Rise25. John has done thousands of interviews with celebrities, successful entrepreneurs, investors, and CEOs. Today, he's going to be interviewing me, and we are going to be talking about making decisions and some of the reasons why making decisions about relationships can seem so difficult.
All right, great. Thank you, Dr. Murphy, for having me here. And in this episode, this is going to be an interesting episode talking about decision-making processes. So I'm looking forward to it. But first, before we get into that, this episode is brought to you by Marie Murphy, PhD, Relationship Coaching, which provides shame-free, blame-free, non-judgmental relationship coaching. You can talk with Dr. Murphy about the things that seem maybe too messy or too weird or stigmatized to share with your best friend or with your spouse or even your therapist. So to learn more about her relationship coaching practice, you can go to mariemurphyphd.com. All right. So first, before we dive into this topic of decision making, before we get to that, I think it's important that we kind of start with talking a little bit about the language. I know one of the goals of this show is to help reduce shame and blame associated with infidelity. But even those words and phrases, they're a hot point, they're a touch point. But there's different words. There's infidelity, there's cheating, there's having an affair. They have negative connotations. What do you say to someone who's maybe listening to this for the first time and who are just, immediately maybe the hairs on the back of their neck go up? What do you say to listeners about all those different words and just kind of getting us all on the same page?
Yeah. So there is a bit of a contradiction between wanting to destigmatize talking about infidelity while also using a word like infidelity that's pretty loaded. And,
Right.
the best I can do is acknowledge this tension or this potential contradiction and point out that our language around infidelity is pretty limited. We don't really have a way of talking about it without reifying, even if unintentionally, the idea that infidelity is inherently bad. So what I try to do is clarify that while we use words like adultery or cheating or being unfaithful, what I'm talking about here is doing something that your partner doesn't know about that goes outside of the bounds of the relationship. And when we start to talk about it in that way, or at least offer that kind of language, I think it helps us approach these kinds of situations a little bit more constructively. It helps us look at these kinds of scenarios in a more neutral light as puzzles that we can solve rather than big, bad, weighty, terrible problems that we have to fix. And I think this is a really important starting point.
Yeah. It kind of I imagine that gets in the way of finding a resolution.
It can. It's an interesting problem.
Because
But
if you're beating yourself up, if you're just angry, if you're just in a fit of anger or a fit of self-doubt or a fit of self-regret, then it probably inhibits any productive discourse around making a decision about your life.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the interesting tension here is that a lot of people do believe that if they are quote unquote cheating or committing adultery, that they are doing something wrong. And this is where it gets interesting because on the one hand, we don't want to get into this you are bad, there is good and there is bad, and there's no gray area in between kind of mode. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with saying, I have these values that are important to me. And currently I'm doing something that I don't really think is right. And I don't really want to continue doing this. And I want to resolve this dilemma in my life in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a big difference between looking at your situation in that way as a very, as a very human conundrum, even if it's kind of a messy one, and telling yourself that you're doing something terrible and therefore you are terrible.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive a little bit deeper. So why is it not helpful to tell yourself that you're doing something wrong? If your inclination, if you're feeling, if everyone else is telling you you're doing something wrong, if society's telling you you're doing something wrong, why is it not helpful?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a number of reasons, but for the point of today's conversation, one of the big reasons is telling yourself this can really inhibit decision making. And you may be in a situation where you need to make some decisions or you'll want to make some decisions. And there's so much in human behavior that doesn't fall into the black and white categories of good or bad. So much of human life is in the more, nuanced gray area in between those two poles. And the thing with decisions is that we actually have more of them than we tend to think that we do. We have a choice about everything. We don't have to do anything. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences if we do or don't do a particular thing, but there are consequences no matter what we do. And
Right.
inaction has its own consequences, just like any particular course of action does.
Right. Yeah.
And this is true. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, so there must be a process. I know you have a way of, working with clients to take them through a process of making a choice. So what would that look like? Like, how does that lay out?
Yeah. So first of all, the most important thing is to recognize that you do have a choice. And so often in our lives, we think that we don't have choices. And this is especially true in the arena of relationships because people have a lot of strong beliefs about what's okay and what's possible and what isn't. And many of us absorb these beliefs. So for instance, people sometimes come to me and say things like, I'm cheating on my spouse. I really want to leave my marriage, but I can't. And I also feel really bad about cheating. So I don't know what to do. And I fully understand and empathize with the fact that a lot of people really believe this or some variation of this. Many of us have really internalized the idea that, we made a commitment to staying with our partner or our spouse until death do us part. And that if we don't do that, then there's something wrong with us.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, we do have a choice. You do have a choice. You can leave your marriage. Things will certainly happen if you do, but things will also happen if you don't. And we'll talk more about that part later. But the first critical point in this conversation is that we have more choices than we think we do. We always have a choice, even if we think we don't, perhaps especially when we think we don't.
Yeah, it is interesting how people think that they don't have a choice. They really internalize that. They believe that there is no choice.
Yeah. And we do this in many aspects of our lives. It's not just in relationships. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it could be a job. It could be
Absolutely.
where they live. It could be the people they hang out with. All those different things.
Yeah.
So that's just getting over that. That's as far as the process of making decision. That's really kind of the first piece is recognizing that you have the ability to make a choice.
Yeah. And that can be a really big deal. But once you have at least kind of gotten your head around that, the next step is to figure out what choice or choices you are trying to make. And depending on your situation, depending on what you've been thinking about, depending on your emotional state of being, simply doing this may be a little bit challenging. You may have some really big decisions to consider. If you're married or partnered and you're seeing someone on the side and you've spent your whole life, believing that you want to have a monogamous relationship, you may be really confused. You may be wondering if you want to continue your relationship with your spouse or your partner. You may be wondering if the relationship with your affair partner is a signal that you should end your marriage and open up your marriage. You may be wondering if you're having a midlife crisis. You may be wondering if you should be in a relationship at all. And the other thing here is that, these decisions will most likely should you make decisions, I should say, these decisions will have an impact on other areas of your life and on other people around you. And when we start to think about all of that, when we go down like the futuristic road of what implication will this choice have for my life as a whole and my future forever and ever, we get sucked into the vortex of indecision and overwhelm. And that's not a good place to be.
No. Okay. So this might seem like a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. But when I have a hard decision to make in my life at any point in time, I find it helpful sometimes to write a list of pros and cons. Like these are the different options, and this is the yay, this is the nay. Is that wise at this point in the discussion and this point in the decision-making process?
Yeah, definitely. But before doing that, what we need to do is identify what choice it is we're trying to make. We have to we also have to make a decision to get out of overwhelm and confusion and indecision. Because we can stay in those places for as long as we want. We can stay there for the rest of our lives if we want to. So the first shift that I suggest that is necessary to make, that a lot of people really need to make, is to choose to look at your situation as possible to change and possible to solve. And that's a big attitude shift for a lot of us. And
so
then
acknowledge you have a choice and then choose. So what was the second one? What you just said? Choose.
Acknowledge that you have a choice.
Acknowledge that you have a choice.
That you have choices about anything. Decide that it's possible to get out of your confusion and overwhelm and indecision. And then start to figure out what choices you need to make.
Because it might not just be one simple decision. It might be a series of decisions that you really have to make.
Yeah.
Related to one another, interrelated. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, if you're in a situation like you're married and you're having an affair and you have a family and you have a home and you have, like a shared life with your partner, yes, your decisions are interrelated to a certain extent. But if you start to tell yourself that they're so interrelated that you can't possibly make one decision, you're kind of screwed. You got to start somewhere. So the first thing to do is just figure out where you're going to start. What decision are you going to start with? What's it going to be? And let's just say, to use that past example, let's just say that your first point of decision is, do I want to stay married to my spouse? And that isn't necessarily the first decision that you have to make. But for many folks in that kind of a situation, it's a pretty big decision. And it's important to take this seriously and not avoid it. So then to get to your previous comment, this is the process. Identify all of the reasons why you would choose to stay married to your spouse. Often, it's also really important to identify all of the reasons why you think you have to stay married to your spouse or should stay married to your spouse. A lot of us have a lot of beliefs like that, and those kinds of beliefs tend to have a lot of power over us. So if you're doing this exercise, I encourage you to get out something to write on and actually write these lists down. Getting all of these kinds of thoughts out of your head and onto some external medium really makes a difference.
Okay. What else? What's the next step in this process?
Well, first of all, make these lists as exhaustive as possible. It's very easy to tell yourself, oh, I'll think of some other reasons later, or, I don't really want to sit down and think about this. It's so easy to avoid this kind of stuff. And that only serves to make the whole choice or the whole situation more complicated and difficult than they need to be. So if, and we tend to tell ourselves things like, I don't really understand what I want. Like, I don't know what's right for me. Well, guess what? This is how you start to find out. So sit your butt down in the chair, make the list of why you would choose to stay in your marriage, why you think you have to stay in your marriage, why you think you should stay in your marriage, as exhaustive as possible, or whatever the decision is for you. And make these lists, make these reasons, as mundane or as profound as you want them to be. Like, challenge yourself to be as honest and comprehensive as possible. And then you may have guessed what's coming next. Now you need to write down all of the reasons why you would not choose to stay married to your spouse. All of the reasons why you don't want to stay married, or all of the reasons why you don't want to do the other thing. Like, why would you make the other choice? And once you've made these, extensive, exhaustive, honest lists, take a look at both lists. And now here's the part that usually freaks people out, but sometimes in a good way. You now get to decide which set of reasons you like better. Do you like your reasons for staying married to your spouse better than your reasons for not staying married to them? That points to a decision.
Yeah.
And this may seem ridiculously simple. And if it does, I encourage you to ask yourself why it needs to be more complicated. Sometimes we make things a lot harder than they need to be. Sometimes we generate confusion when there really isn't any confusion.
Now, when someone makes these lists, do you find that oftentimes they're lopsided or evenly balanced?
Sometimes, well, a lot of different things happen. And one of the things that I see the most is that people will come up with a long list of reasons why they really want to leave their partnership, and a short list of reasons why they can't leave their partnership. And they try to tell me why that short list of reasons why they can't leave beats out the list of reasons why they want to leave. And in a way, I think this makes so much sense. And this is because there are so many ideas in our society about how relationships are supposed to be. And a lot of us, believe this stuff and don't see a way out of our own predicaments. It's like, well, if I leave my marriage, like, what will my extended family think of me? Or, if other people know that I had an affair, like, what if everyone shuns me? What if all of my kids' parents don't want to talk to me anymore? And, this stuff is really powerful. But we also, we can navigate these things to a greater extent than we usually think we can. And there's so much opportunity to get unstuck from the beliefs that keep us trapped in prisons of our own making, essentially.
And what are those, the reasons?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Sorry, what were those? You said there are different ways in which we can get unstuck.
Yeah. I mean, this is usually where the rubber really hits the road and the coaching process comes in, because for everybody, this is different. Like, some of us have grown up believing that, like, marriage is the only legitimate form of a relationship. We believe that, like, terrible things will happen to us if we leave our marriage. Terrible things will happen to us if we tell our partner that we've been having an affair. Terrible things will happen, So in dismantling all of these beliefs for each of us as individuals, that work is our own to do. And there's no magic fix-it button. And this is why having a coach to help you out can be so incredibly helpful. Because when we're left to our own devices, we can convince ourselves of just about anything, including of things that aren't really all that helpful to us.
Right. Now, one of the big reasons people put off a big decision is just straight outright fear over what might happen if they make that decision. So let's talk about that a little bit, how you address that with people and how they overcome that fear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's one thing that's really important to point out here, and that is, like, let's say that, you believe that, your extended family will, shun you if you get a divorce. It may be true that they will react badly. Like what you're anticipating may be totally possible. It may happen. It also might not happen or might not be as bad as you think it's going to happen. But we can always navigate that. It doesn't mean that we don't have a choice. Like, yes, it may be true that your extended family will shun you if you get a divorce, but that doesn't mean that you literally cannot get a divorce. Like, that's a big distinction that's hard for many of us to get. The other thing, that holds people back or that contributes to some of the fear around decision making is that we tend to think that there's like a right decision and a wrong decision out there. And in general, that isn't the case. In general, there's, a better decision for us and a less good decision for us, but that's all determined by what we think. And that's why we make the list that we just talked about making. So if you like your reasons for staying married, then that's a better decision for you than not staying married. If you, and I want to make this point clear, this kind of like twist people's minds a little bit. But if you think avoiding other people's reactions to a divorce is a great reason to stay married, that's okay. Like if that choice feels good to you, that's okay. Often, for a lot of people, it actually feels terrible. So the work is in shifting your beliefs in a way that you can give yourself permission to do something that other people might not approve of.
That's a great point. Any final advice as we wrap this up on anyone who's listening to this who maybe has been putting off that big decision or any big decision in their life? Any final tips or advice for them?
Yeah, several actually. Another thing, in addition to thinking that there's like a perfect decision out there or a right decision and a wrong decision, it's really important to remember that oftentimes there's nothing else we need to know before we make a decision.
For the high fact finders out there who feel like they need to do a ton of research before they can make a decision.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, yes, it may be true that there are some things that you need to figure out. But if you tend to dwell in that mode, if you tend to think that there's always another thing that you need to discover before you can make a decision, here's what I say to you. Make a list of the things that you need to know in order to be less confused, and then actively obtain that information. And also, remember that there are some things that we simply can't know. So many people use their inability to predict the future as a reason for holding off on making decisions indefinitely.
Right.
But that's not a great reason.
Right. Like what will, what will holidays look like for my family in the future, or where will I live, or where will the kids go to school, or those types of things that probably people are wondering about, and they don't know they're not going to know the answer to that probably.
Sure. And even more existential things like, what will I ever love again? Will I ever be in a committed relationship again? Like, the list can go on and on.
Right.
And the inability to know the future is not a good reason to hold off on making a decision. We don't know the future no matter what we do.
Right. Well, Dr. Murphy, this has been great. I'm sure we could go on in this topic for quite a lot longer. You look like you have one more point that you want to make, though, so I want to give you the opportunity before we wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, John. There's
probably 10 more points, actually.
There are just a couple more things I want to say that are really important here. And one is that, folks I work with tend to love these decision-making tools that we've talked about when it comes to decisions that don't have anything to do with their love life, but resist them a little bit when it comes to making decisions about love. And I think one of the reasons for that is, we have a lot of ideas in our society about love being this mysterious force that is impossible for us to fully understand. And, we think we don't know when we love someone or are in love with someone. And these ideas about the mysteriousness of love don't necessarily serve us. Like so many other things in life, love is a choice. Only we can know whether or not we love someone. And that the matter of what love is or isn't is something that we'll take up at another time. But if you're getting into this like, oh, I don't know what love means thing, like put yourself in check and ask yourself, like, what am I getting out of not making a decision? What am I getting out of avoiding a decision? Often the answer has something to do with not wanting to deal with the discomfort that might come when you shake up your familiar life. And it's true, familiarity can be really comfortable, even if that familiarity includes a whole bunch of misery. So that's always a good question to ask yourself. And one question to conclude that we can all ask ourselves every day, whether we're facing a big decision or not, is how good can I stand it?
How good can I stand it?
How good can I stand it? How happy can I allow myself to be? How amazing can my life be? How excited about living can I be?
That's a great point. All right. Wrapping up on that point, Dr. Murphy, where can people go learn more about you?
My website is mariemurphyphd.com. Come check it out, and you can schedule a consultation with me there if you're interested in working with me.
This is a great analysis of a topic that seems simple on its face, but really isn't, especially when it comes to the more important decisions, the more weighty decisions we have to make in our life. So thank you for taking the weight of all your experience, your expertise, your background, and really kind of helping to break down this topic in this episode. It was great.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. One last thing I want to say about this. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to do it. When you actually do this for yourself, it's not necessarily going to be easy, and that is not a problem.
That's a great point. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.